Hey, my feel good friend, and welcome to minisode 35 of the Feel Good Social podcast. I'm going to be sharing 4 tips for how you can share personal stories and get vulnerable in your content without oversharing on Instagram, right? Because this is something that I personally have dealt with and had to figure out myself over the years. And also, I've had several Feel Good Social clubbers, audience members come to me asking, I know that it's a good idea to share personal things and get a little vulnerable with your audience, but I'm worried about sharing too much, or I don't want to air my dirty laundry all over Instagram, right? And that's a valid concern, seriously, because once you share something online, it is pretty hard to take it back, right? So today we're going to be talking about how you can share things, get personable, get vulnerable with your customers to drive that deeper connection with them and build that trust and brand affinity without oversharing or without feeling like you're just shitting on Instagram's content world and you can't take it back, right? So without further ado, let's go ahead and dive right in. Hey, friend, and welcome to the Feel Good Social podcast. I'm your host, Kinsey, and I'm here to help you market your business in a genuine way that works without wasting your precious time. On this show, we chat about social media strategy and mindset tips with a focus on, you guessed it, feeling good. So sit back, relax, and enjoy some genuine conversation for the good of your biz. Okay, my friend. So before I do dive into these 4 tips that you can always kind of think about, consider, keep in your back pocket and pull out every time you're feeling like, oh my gosh, I want to share this story, but I feel vulnerable. How do I approach this for my brand? All that stuff. I really quickly, once again, want to validate that, yes, I always will encourage you to get personal with your ideal customers online, to get a little vulnerable, to share, the personal experiences, bring the emotions into play, because that does allow you to connect with your ideal customers on a more personal level, right? If you can be more you, be more real, get a little vulnerable with your people, it will do everything to really help you build that trust with them, because then you share this experience that feels a little bit different than just kind of the general experiences that most people are sharing online, right? If you can talk about the struggles, if you can, share those things that you're a little bit afraid to share and everyone else is online, usually that will do more to drive that deeper connection, to help your customers relate to you on that deeper level, to help your brand stand out in their mind, and to make them want to choose you and buy from your brand instead of all the other brands that are doing similar things to yours, right? So getting vulnerable, sharing personal stories is super, super awesome for your brand's content, and I totally encourage it. However, there's always the however, right? Being a little concerned about oversharing is super valid. We do still, while being personal with our brand's content, we want to be aware of the fact that we are sharing for our brand. And so it's really important to consider how you want your brand to show up online. Does this story align with my brand? Does this story relate to my ideal customers, and will they gain some sort of value out of it, whether it's the lesson learned or just feeling like they're not alone, like they've gone through a similar experience, right? And it's also really important to think about the stories that you share from your own personal perspective. It's completely okay to set boundaries within your business. What stories do I want to share with my audience, with the general public? And what stories are just mine? What stories are sacred? What stories do I want to keep to myself because they're truly personal to me, right? So totally valid to, yes, encourage getting vulnerable with your customers, sharing your experiences, because it helps to drive that deeper trust with them. However, it's completely also okay to worry about sharing something that then you want to take back, but the internet has already taken it and run with it. Or also just like keeping things private to yourself is completely okay. You don't need to be airing everything, your entire personal life, to your ideal customers, right? So, the first tip that I have for you is when it comes to sharing, especially painful experiences, especially like experiences that were super, super emotional for you, right? As the person who experienced them, the first thing I recommend is to share from the scar, not the scab. And what that means is to give yourself time to process, right? If you experience something that was super emotional and raw and upsetting in some way or whatever it is, right? And it's relatable to your ideal customers and you want to share with them and all that different stuff, that can be great, but you want to give yourself enough time for that wound that you're feeling, for the emotions and like the reactivity around that experience to kind of scar more than just scab over, right? Because a scab, okay, I probably should have like started this little story with like a disclaimer, like I hope that this doesn't get too disgusting of an analogy, right? But like a scab, like you can actually like just accidentally scratch it off and then all of a sudden your wound is like bleeding again, right? Like sorry if that grosses you out, but like that's the analogy. But a scar is fully healed over. Yes, it's still there. Yes, you can still see it. Yes, it's still a part of you. And it still might like be a reminder of whatever the experience was. Might like hurt just a little bit still, but it's not gonna like, you're not gonna scratch it off and it's gonna start bleeding and you're gonna start emotionally just like reacting to everything, right? We all go through those experiences that are super, super hard for us. And like immediately after the experience, I personally turn into a freaking Tasmanian devil. Like my emotions are all over the place. Like I can't handle it. I don't know what to do. Definitely, I would suggest if you are wanting to share a personal story on Instagram, don't share from the Tasmanian devil open wound area for sure. But even after you have like given yourself a little bit of time to heal and your wound has been able to like scab over a little bit, right? It's still fresh enough. And maybe you still haven't processed enough of the experience to really share from like a helpful place. And so it's always a good idea to give yourself enough time to process everything and to allow your like experience wound to fully heal before you say anything online. Okay. That's not to say that you shouldn't talk about this experience like with your friends or with your family or with your support system, right? Like, I think it's very important. I'm not a mindset coach or anything like that, but when you go through painful experiences, it is important to speak to people about them. You don't want to hold everything inside. Speaking to people allows that wound to heal. However, it's not the internet. Okay. And it's not your ideal customers from your brand's Instagram account. Okay. So when it comes to sharing personal stories, just make sure that you're giving yourself enough time to process. And that can be different depending on the situation, depending on the person. Maybe you went to the grocery store and some guy cut in front of you at line and like said something dumb to you. And you are very reactive in the moment and like literally want to punch his face out, but you stop, you don't, it's fine. You go home, you're like fuming, but maybe after a couple hours, you're like thinking back on the situation and you're like, okay, I've processed this. This is now a scar. I'm not just going to like go online and be like, F all dudes. Instead, I'm going to go online. I'm going to write an Instagram post about it that's saying something like, this guy cut in front of me in the grocery store and it just made me think about how blah, 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 this relates to my brand. And like, this is my takeaway for the story, right? That might take a few hours, whereas something that's deeply, deeply personal and deeply upsetting for you, that could probably take months, to process / years. There's a few personal events in my life that I still have a lot of trouble sharing about that I don't really share about because I don't necessarily feel like I can yet, and it's been years and years and years, and that's okay. But it's just important to fully think through, is this a scab or is this a scar? Can I share about this story from a place of like calm reflection? Or am I feeling like I need to share about this story from a place of like reactivity? And honestly, I will never tell you like you must share from the scar. You can never share from the scab. Like, no, I don't care. Like, share from the scabs if needed. It's just one of those things that you always want to be aware about and like question yourself. How is this story feeling to me right now? Do I feel reactive or do I feel calm and reflective? And depending on which answer it is, do I feel okay sharing this story? Right? So that's what I want you to ask yourself. Okay. Tip number 2, you don't have to share the nitty-gritty details. So this is like one of those big eye-opening moments that I personally feel. There's been a few times, a few experiences that I have learned from in my life, learned from in my business that I felt would be helpful to share online for Feel Good Social because it's relatable. I learned some things from it, all that different stuff, right? But the experience itself was like complicated and or emotional still and or did not just solely have to do with me, right? So some experiences that we have might involve other people that you don't feel comfortable sharing about or involving them. And so it's okay to share about an experience and not share like all the nitty gritty details, right? Like you don't have to get into he said, she said. You don't even have to say exactly what the experience that you had was. You can just say, I really experienced like a hard life shifting experience. And then, right? Especially this is helpful for talking about the transformation that that experience caused you, right? Because that's really what we want to share usually when we're sharing personal experiences online is like this horrible thing happened and then this is what I learned. This is how my life changed. This is what I took away from it. This is how I now show up because I learned from that, right? And so usually we don't necessarily need the horrible, horrible details of whatever the event was that happened that's like hard for you to share, that's stopping you from sharing. You can say, 5 years ago, my family went through like a life-shattering experience. And since then, I was kind of closed off when I was showing up in the world, when I was making friends, all that different stuff. But honestly, after starting my business, it allowed me to connect with more people online. And it allowed me to open myself up again and blossom once again as a human, find myself who I truly am, instead of defining myself by this thing that happened to me that I couldn't control, but that was limiting me from showing up in my life. Right? That's a personal story that I could share on an Instagram post. So you can totally just say like something really terrible happened and then, right? You can be as kind of muddy with the details if you want. And often that is like not what really matters in the story that you're trying to tell, but it's what stops us from showing up. So just remember that like next time you want to go share a vulnerable story, like people don't need to know all the stuff. They more so want to know what you learned, how you've changed, and how it can be helpful for them, which is usually in the after transformation from this vulnerable thing that you're trying to share, right? Okay, tip number 3 is to speak to the universal emotions and the universal lessons learned in these personal stories, okay? Because this is how, one, you will actually relate to your ideal customers more so because then you're inviting them in and you're relating the story to what they could also feel or what they could also learn, right? And also speaking to the universal emotions and lessons not only invites them in, but it also kind of relieves the pressure on you and makes the story a little less personal and feel a little less vulnerable so that maybe it's not quite as scary to share, right? So what I mean by that is like most of the time when we're telling stories, like there are very specific experiences that happened to us, how it happened, the people in our stories that we personally know. That is the thing that is making us feel scared to share the story, right? But that's like not what matters as much as I was feeling just like heartbroken, all of your ideal customers have felt heartbroken at some point, right? Or I was just super freaking frustrated and I wanted to fucking punch him in the face. I didn't mean to say the F-bomb, but like that's what comes out. But we've all felt that, right? Like we've all felt like the frustration. We've all felt heartbroken. We've all felt annoyed. We've all felt just like amazingly overjoyed, happy, like too enthusiastic, right? Whatever specific experience caused you to feel that way doesn't matter as much as like you inviting your audience into the emotion that they have also felt too in their life at some point, right? And when you speak to that emotion, it allows them to relive their memory that made them feel that way as well. And they just feel closely connected to you through that emotion instead of the specific experience that maybe is holding us back from sharing the story more so, right? Hopefully this is making sense. Another thing that you can share is like the universal lessons learned, the moral of the story, the universal things that you learned, like speaking to that instead of speaking to like the specific nitty-gritty details, allows people to connect with you more so, and also allows like you to not feel as uncomfortable sharing, right? I'm not saying that you shouldn't include specific nitty-gritty details or anything like that. But, you know, if you can make the emotions and make the lessons learned the point, then it becomes easier. So hopefully that makes sense. But if you have any questions, make sure you reach out to me on Instagram. I'm at feelgoodsocial. I would love to chat with you about this, my friend. Okay, so the fourth and final tip is know your takeaway. Okay, so this is the difference between just airing dirty laundry on Instagram, complaining about something, just raging it out about something, and creating a post that's valuable for people and telling a story that lands for people, right? Knowing your takeaway. What's the moral of the story? What's the point of the story? What's the value in the story? What did you learn from this story, right? Like, what is the conclusion? We always want to know why we are telling a story to someone, because that is how people feel like it's valuable content, feel like, oh yeah, like this makes sense. I took something away from this story. Like, I'm glad I read this story versus cool story, bro. Or like, ugh, this like lady's just complaining again. But like there's no conclusion. There's like no helpful tips in here. It's just like a rant fest, right? So always know why you are telling your ideal customers a certain story, because that will help you determine what stories to share on social media, right? So I kind of mentioned a few of them, but it could be the lesson that you learned, right? It could be how this has changed your life, inspirational, right? It could be just entertaining if you wanted it to be, like commenting ironically on a certain something or whatever. If you're interested in what valuable content is on Instagram, actually next week's episode 115 is going to be breaking down the different categories of value add content, how to create valuable content on Instagram. So definitely make sure that you keep an eye out for that episode, because that's going to help you understand, like, how can I tell a story that is valuable for my ideal customers, right? But ultimately, you just want to know, like, the moral of the story and why your ideal customers are hearing this story from you and what they'll take away from this story. Okay, so those are the 4 tips, my friend. Share from the scar, not the scab. You don't have to share all the nitty-gritty details. It's okay to just kind of be abstract and then go into the lessons you learned and all that different stuff. Speak to the universal emotions and lessons learned instead of focusing on the nitty-gritty details and the specifics of your story, right? Because that's how you can connect more so with your ideal customers and also relieve the vulnerability pressure that you might feel. And then finally, just know your takeaway, know why you are sharing this story with your ideal customers. What will they get out of this story? Okay, that's all I got for you for today's minisode. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, let's connect on Instagram, my friend. I'm at feelgoodsocial. I would love to connect with you, give you a follow, all the things. If you do give me a follow and you came from the podcast, make sure that you send me a message and introduce yourself just so I can be sure to follow you back, because you know I will. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your week, and I'll catch you next time I catch you. Thanks so much for listening, my friend. For show notes and a whole lot of other awesome freebies, visit feelgoodsocial.com. Simply go to feelgoodsocial.com for all the goods.